This video was made possible by Tab for a Cause. Start raising money for charity with every tab you open by going to the link in the description. Hello and welcome to the Dregs of the Last Wendover video. This is Heathrow Airport. It's the busiest and biggest airport in the UK, and for complicated reasons, they used to have a flight 6 times a week to Cardiff, Wales that no passengers were allowed to take. What you need to know about Heathrow is that it has only 2 runways, whereas Chicago O'Hare Airport, which flies about as many passengers yearly as Heathrow, has 7. And if my advanced differential calculus class taught me anything, it's that 7 is more than 2. Would be almost as much of a lie saying I took advanced differential calculus would be saying that Heathrow is quiet and calm. In fact, it's the exact antonym of these words. It's rowdy and tempestuous? No, what it is crowded. Really crowded. Super crowded. I have the best words. Because of that, airlines can't just go and decide they want to start flying there. They need to own a slot pair. These are rights for airlines to land and take off at the airport at a particular time, and they're tradable and sellable. Because this is the main airport of one of the world's largest and most important cities, there's a huge amount of demand from airlines to fly there, but there are only 650 daily slot pairs. Because of economics, that means prices are high, really high. For example, up until 2016, Kenya Airways owned a slot pair that gave them the right to operate a flight landing at Heathrow at 6:30 a.m. and departing at 8:25 a.m. This is the most popular time of day to operate flights, as it's when overnight flights from the US and Asia tend to arrive, and Oman Air, flying from Muscat, Oman, wanted to operate an overnight flight, so they bought this slot pair from Kenya Airways for $75 million. This was the highest amount ever paid for a Heathrow slot pair, but they still regularly sell for tens of millions of dollars, so once airlines have them, they don't want to lose them. Airlines are required to use their slot 80% of the time, or else they'll be dissolved and given to the next airline on the waiting list, and that was what led to this ghost flight to Cardiff. In early 2007, British Mediterranean Airways permanently cancelled their flight to Tashkent, Uzbekistan due to long-term civil unrest, but because of that, the Heathrow slot pairs they had been using to fly that flight sat empty. The Tashkent flight was scheduled to leave Heathrow at 2:35 p.m. and arrive back the next day at noon, but to keep their slots, they don't have to use them for any particular flight, they just have to use them. Therefore, British Mediterranean flew their small A320 over to Cardiff at 2:35 p.m. and returned the next day at 12 noon, 6 days a week. On each flight, the plane had no passengers, only the crew, which seems to break the well-respected business strategy of making money, but since the cancellation of the Tashkent route was last minute, according to the airline, it would have been too expensive to set up contracts for baggage handlers, hire gate agents, find translators, and do everything else needed to actually carry passengers to Cardiff for the few months they had to hold these slots. Needless to say, environmental advocates were not amused, and it soon became a big scandal. But who cares about the Earth anyways? We can always move to the third world countries. British Mediterranean Airways wasn't the only airline to protect their slots at Heathrow with empty flights. In 2004, Qantas Airways bought 2 slot pairs from Flybe for $25 million, but until they were able to set up the flights to Australia, which needed to operate via Singapore due to the distance, they needed to hold on to the slots. Their solution was at least slightly more practical. As an Australian airline, they weren't allowed to operate domestic flights within the UK, so they chartered a small 112-seat British Aerospace 146 from a British airline to fly 2 flights a day up to Manchester. You were only allowed to book this flight as a connection to or from a Qantas flight to Australia, and the airline already had an agreement with British Airways to offer connecting flights to Manchester, so this flight supposedly operated on some days with only 2 or 3 passengers. Still, 2 passengers are better than none. These slot-sitting flights certainly do still exist, but they're often more subtle, like how airlines will, in winter when overall demand is lower, decrease the number of flights to their furthest away destinations, which are expensive to fly to, and increase the number of flights to their nearest cheap-to-fly-to destinations. Now, as we've covered, all these empty flights were single-handedly responsible for climate change, so what if I told you you could help the environment without giving up any time or money? That'd be a dream, right? Well, you can do exactly that by going to tab.gladly.io/HAI and installing Tab for a Cause. Once you do that, each time you open a tab in your browser, an ad displays, and then everything they make through those ads, minus what it takes to run Tab for a Cause, is donated to the charity you choose, such as Conservation International, which helps to make sure the Earth doesn't turn into a flaming ball of death. To date, they've donated more than $500,000, so once again, if you want to do good without doing anything, install Tab for a Cause at tab.gladly.io/HAI or click the link at the top of the description.